Hi and welcome back to Mondraker TV. Today we're in my workshop because I've got a number of tips I want to share with you all about looking after your bike through the winter months. Now it's great fun getting out in the mud, the wet, the snow and conditions like that, but it can take its toll on your bike. But with a bit of pre and post ride care, you can make sure your bike is going to be great for riding out the trails and spend less time in the workshop. Now it doesn't matter if your bike's a regular bike or if it's an e-mountain bike. There's a number of tips here that are going to be useful for you. Like many riders in the Northern Hemisphere, if I didn't ride my mountain bike in winter conditions, then, well, I pretty much wouldn't ride mountain bikes, since it seems to be like it most of the time. So over the years, I've kind of built a bit of a workflow in setting up my bikes, like a bit of preparation and looking after my bikes immediately after riding. I think it's going to be really useful for a number of people out there. So we're going to break the video into two parts, pre-ride prep and post-ride care. Let's get to it. Mudguards. Now, unlike what you see on road bikes and town bikes, they're not to keep you clean. They're to keep mud out of your face and, to a point, keeping mud off some parts of your bike. Now, depending on where you live, where you ride, the type of mud and the type of forks and stuff you have on your bike, you'll have limitations. So on the Fox and Öhlins forks I have on my Mondraker bikes, I like to use the direct mount style mudguards. This one's from RRP, although you can get ones made by Fox, they're a bit shorter though. For the UK conditions I ride in, I need the longest possible mudguards to keep all that spray out my face. An additional benefit of these particular ones by RRP is I have seal guards, so it stops the mud from gathering around the seals. We'll get to that in a minute. You can also get other style mudguards that are useful for keeping mud off the linkages on the rear of your bike. So if your particular mountain bike is prone to mud collecting there, you might want to look at one of those. They can, however, be easy to overlook and look at and thinking, oh, they're really small, they're not going to do anything. But the job is just to keep the mud away from the important parts of the rear end there. Next up, fork seals. Inspect your fork seals before you ride, make sure there's no damage to them, make sure there's no scratches on the stanchion tube, so that's the upper legs of your suspension fork, and then you want to make sure they're nice and clean as well. So a mud guard, like the one I just showed you, will definitely help mud from sort of collecting in that area, but it's obviously inevitable in winter that you're going to get mud on there. Now with a suspension safe lubricant, you can get these in a dropper bottle style format or a spray. Now I tend to use the bottles rather than the sprays because I don't like the idea that I could accidentally get the mist of the spray near the disc brake rotors, but both products work excellently. You want to put some on the fork leg, compress the fork a number of times, and you'll find any dirt and dust under those seals will be lifted out onto the legs. Wipe it off, give them a little bit of a clean, and go and hit the trails, knowing that those forks will feel a lot better. But make sure that you don't just keep on doing this, it's just an interim bit of maintenance. You will need to do lower leg services, which we'll get into in another video here on Mondraker TV. Moto foam. This stuff is non-absorbent foam, essentially, a little bit like what you see in fish tanks, although it's not scratchy. That's one of the key things. Now, motocross mechanics have been using this for years, stuffing it in holes in their engines and things on the bikes to stop mud collecting there for two reasons. One, mud gets really thick and heavy and affects the ride of the bike, and two, it makes it a nightmare to clean. Many mountain bikes have got little pockets that can sort of harbour mud. If yours has, get yourself some moto foam. You can get these online, chop it up, stuff it in. Works great. Grease. Get loads of the stuff. Now, grease obviously is a lubricant and an installation aid for many parts of the bike, but it's also a barrier against moisture. Now, there's a few particular places on your mountain bike where this is going to help in winter months. One of them is your upper headset race. Now, water just sits on the top, and we all hose our bikes down when they get wet and muddy, and if water's going to sit there, it's going to work its way in eventually. So it's a good idea, take your headset components out, make sure the bearing's okay, put some fresh grease under it, around it, and plenty on the top, and reassemble it. The other place that's beneficial to have grease for the winter months is inside your free hub body. Now, whether yours has a pulled style design or a ratchet style design, it's well worth making sure it's nice and clean and putting some fresh grease on the inside there. It definitely helps keep the moisture at bay. Okay, tyres and tyre pressure are your next things. Now, the first thing you can do without spending any money is experiment with your tyre pressure. Get out there with a pump and experiment on a trail that you know well and try and find how much grip you can get. Simply put, the firmer your tyres are, the least grip you will have because the tyre can't conform around objects like rocks and roots and stuff. The softer your tyre is, the more grip you will have, but you will suffer other handling attributes, like the bike will roll slower. If the tyre hasn't got good casing, you can have too much like roll on there. So get out there and experiment. It's free grip. The next stage is to get yourself a little digital pressure gauge. Now this can be a bit more precise in terms of finding what your pressures are and then noting them down for future reference. Definitely get yourself one of those, it's a good way to work. And then of course, there's tyre choice itself. Now I like to have a third tyre in my selection. So I have a set of tyres that I use all year round. When it comes to winter, I will swap the front tyre out for a more aggressive winter style tyre. Now that can come in one of two formats. It can come in softer compound rubber. For example, Maxxis offer Max Terra as their sort of all-round compound. It's got the best compromise of fast rolling and traction, but they also offer Max Grip. Now this is what I love to use on the front end of bikes because it has that bit more traction in foul conditions or wet rock and places like that. It does roll slower and it does wear faster, but the grip you get is phenomenal. The other option, of course, is to go for something far more suitable for wet conditions. Now this is a Shorty tyre. You can get this in both compounds I've just referenced, but the point with this is it does two things. It's got a very open tread pattern that cuts through the wet mud to grip on the firmer ground underneath, and it also has that widely spaced profile to help shed the mud, so it won't clog up like what you're seeing on screen, which is just an all-round tyre. These sort of things, if you ride in those sort of conditions, that really can make a huge difference to you. And the 3 tyre rotation as well can save you a bit of money rather than having winter tyres and summer tyres, because obviously your rear tyre is going to wear out faster than your front. So when your rear tyre is gone, you can move the front one onto the rear and put your winter front on. And then when it comes to spring, replace that worn out rear tyre. Kind of works pretty well, is keeping going that way. Keeping your transmission clean and lubricated is the key to making it A, shift well, B, nice and quiet, and C, last a long time. Now having the correct lube for where you ride is really important. So lubes typically come in dry, all conditions, and wet. If you're riding in outright wet conditions like I do a lot of the time, a wet lube obviously is going to be the best solution for that. And the reason being is a thick, highly hydrophobic liquid that stays in place. This is amazing for wet conditions. However, if you ride in sandy conditions, for example, it can also attract that to it, which isn't necessarily the best thing because then it creates a bit of a grinding paste that can actually have a negative effect. In which case, you might want to consider something like an all conditions lube. Now this stuff runs a lot cleaner on your transmission, but you will need to apply it more frequently and therefore it's going to cost you a little bit more. So it's about weighing up the pros and cons, and it's also about how often you maintain your bike. The cleaner your transmission is, the better it's going to work. Next up, get yourself a chain checker. Now this one's from Park Tool. They're fairly cheap, but it will definitely save you money in the long term, so it's a good investment to have. Really easy to check. You literally just sit this in your chain and basically it correlates to this. It tells you if your chain is worn and when to replace it. Now there's 2 ways you can actually think about this. One of them is to replace the chain before it's worn, which it might sound counterintuitive because you've got to spend more money in the short term to save more in the long term, but it's possible to get up to 3 chains from 1 cassette. Now the cost of a chain compared to a cassette is a huge difference. The other option, of course, is to replace the whole lot at once when it's worn out. Now if you check your chain and it's looking like it's a little bit tired and it's a winter time of year, leave it. Unless it's dramatically affecting your shifting, you may as well keep going until it's totaled. Yeah, so keep going until spring if you can, and then replace it for a nice fresh one. So when the trails are nice and dry in spring, you've got a nice fresh transmission. But definitely consider replacing your chain before it's worn, because it will save you money in the long term. If you're riding an e-mountain bike, it's worth having a look before you ride where your sensor is. Now it could be based on the rear wheel or it could be near the bottom bracket depending on the model of bike that you have. Make sure that it's attached to the bike, make sure it's not damaged, and make sure it's not just covered in a layer of stuff that can affect the performance. Battery check, obviously. Now regardless whether your bike's an e-mountain bike or a regular bike, it could well have battery technology on there. If you're running SRAM Access, you could have a Access reverb dropper post, for example, or the transmission itself using a battery on the rear derailleur. Now I have a number of bikes that have got different Access components on, so as a result I have a number of chargers set up behind me in my workshop, and as part of my workflow when I clean a bike I'll take the batteries off, put the blanking plates on, put the batteries on charge. Obviously I make sure I try and deplete them here and there, but I always make sure I've got batteries and I know where they are in terms of charging, so it's easy to forget these things. Now, if you've got an e-mountain bike, obviously check your battery, and where you charge it will make a difference, especially if it's the colder months of the year. If you can remove your battery like you can with the TQ system on the Neat, you can always charge these indoors. But if you've got an integrated battery system, you might not have that luxury. So what you want to do is try and make sure your bike is as warm as possible when charging it, because you're going to get a better battery cycle charging from that. The other thing to bear in mind is the actuator or the remote on your bike. For example, on the Bosch Smart System, that wireless remote, it can be really easy to keep running it until the battery's gone. And even when you get the little prompts on the kiosk display, it can be easy to think, I'll change it next time, and just forget. Just make a routine check, just to see what the battery life is on that, and it will save you hassle in the long term. Okay, on to post-ride care. Now, the first one we want to talk about is cleaning your bike. Now, before you clean your bike, you want to pre-rinse it first. Now, in an ideal world, you will clean your bike the second you stop riding it. So most of that mud is still wet and can come off. The longer you leave it, the more sort of baked on that mud is going to get. So a pre-rinse is going to save you money in the cleaning products that you use. There's no point just putting this sort of stuff directly onto a dirty bike, because you're just going to wash it straight off and you're not going to wash all of the mud off. So get the bike as wet as possible, use a hose pipe, use a jet wash if you want, but be careful where you aim the jet. Don't aim it directly at things like the headset, don't aim it at things like bearings or the e-motors, things like that. Just be careful the way you do this. A mist setting might be better than direct power. But the point is, give your bike a pre-wash before you get to work with product on there. It will save you money. Okay, and a few washing tips. Now, some of these might sound like common sense, but it's quite surprising how many people don't do these things. Now, the number one is don't wash your bike upside down. The seals won't work that well on things like your headset. You're going to fill it up with water and grit and just prematurely wear this stuff out. Also, bikes are designed that water can drain out of them. You don't want to be washing them upside where you're just going to fill the things up. So keep your bike rubber side down when you clean it. Don't aim the jet wash, as I've just said, directly at things like the motor. If you've got an e-bike, at bearings, you know, go in from a top angle or a 3/4 angle, never straight in from the side where the water basically is going to blast past the seals and push the grease out. Of course, that's just going to let other stuff in and wear them out quicker. Now, when it comes to electronic components on the bike, you probably want to take a bit more care. If your e-bike, for example, has a removable battery, leave the battery in place, because that will keep a watertight seal. Second you take it out, you've got the terminals exposed. You don't want that. Then when it comes to displays, things like the Bosch display on the kiosk system, they recommend removing it, but it's not always the same, so check with the manufacturer of your bike. Either way though, if it is in place, just take care. Don't directly spray where the little connections are. You know, you're asking for trouble by spraying water around electrical stuff like that. With SRAM access components, SRAM actually recommend that you remove the batteries and put the blanking plates in place. Now, yes, in an ideal world, you should do this. But I have been in many situations before at trail centres, and I've had to use a jet wash there to clean my bike with the battery in. If you need to do this, just don't directly spray at them, and then make sure afterwards you remove the battery and clean the terminals there. You don't want water and standing stuff to stay there that could corrode or just damage the circuitry on them. Common sense really, it's electrical stuff. And make sure you use a water displacer, especially around anything electrical on your bike. Motor cover. So if your bike is an e-bike, make sure routinely you just remove the motor cover down by the bottom bracket. If yours has a removable battery, then it's super easy to move it anyway. But if yours has an integrated battery, you might not be in the habit of doing this. Make a point of doing it, because mud and stuff can just harbour around the motor. And whilst it will be designed for air to get in there and cool the motor itself and for moisture to drain out, you'll definitely find there'll be a build-up of mud in there, just like on my one. And bear in mind, I clean my bikes a lot and it's still got this on the inside there. So just treat it to a bit of care. It also means you can inspect everything at the same time. When you're cleaning your bike, you should definitely make a point of inspecting certain things. Now, due to the nature of suspension bikes and e-bikes, they can be very complicated around the bottom bracket area, the shock tunnel and places like that. And it can be easy for debris to find its way in there. Small stones, rocks, sticks, things like that. All things that could damage your bike, scratch your bike, or more importantly, damage expensive components like the shock absorber. So use common sense and just have a good inspection around there. You should never just hose your bike and then leave it to the side. It's your pride and joy. Look after it. And the last one is for lubricating your chain and your transmission. Now, if possible, I would always recommend using a dropper bottle of oil, whether you want to use a wet oil, an e-bike specific oil, a dry even, you know, whatever your fancy is. It enables you to get the most out of the package as possible because you can drop oil on every single link. With the sprays, they're very convenient for use, 100%, but you can just end up spraying a lot of it on the floor. And worse, you can, if you're doing it in an outside environment, for example, the mist can carry onto your disc rotors. So be very cautious if you're going to do that, and it's worth protecting your rotors if you're going to use a spray. Do yourselves a favor, and when you're lubricating your chain, always start at the joining master link on there, and then work your way around, and it enables you then to inspect each chain link as well. You want to make sure there's no damage to the links in preparation for your next ride. If there is, now's your time to sort it out. And one last little tip for the e-bikers out there. When lubricating a chain on a regular bike, you can simply turn the crank backwards and lubricate the chain at the bottom. You obviously always want to do it at the bottom because it lubricates the internal part of the chain. On an e-bike, when you turn the crank backwards, the transmission doesn't move. So get an Allen key, in this case, a 5mm Allen key, and put it directly into one of the chainring bolts, and then that holds the chainring against the crank, enabling me to just turn it backwards and lubricate the chain. Simple little hack, always comes in handy. Well, there we go. There's a number of pre and post-ride care maintenance tips for you for your mountain bikes and your e-mountain bikes to look after them this winter. I use these on all my Mondraker bikes the whole time. I feel like these days I'm actually cleaning my bikes every single day. No bad thing though. Now, if there's anything else you want us to make on Mondraker TV, let us know in the comments underneath. If you've got any other tips you want to share or anything you want us to make, let us know. Don't forget to like the video, share it, and please subscribe to the channel for free content every week. See you in the next video. Take care.